What is happening, my friends out there? My name is Jakejames Lugo, and welcome to the channel. So Dracula is back once again. It's like, seriously, the guy keeps getting knocked down and he just keeps coming back. He just doesn't get the freaking hint. So here I am once again to deliver a personalized ass whooping to him. Hopefully you guys will enjoy it. But the game we're talking about today is Castlevania Aria of Sorrow for the Game Boy Advance. This is a game that I've actually changed my stance on over the years. It actually used to be my favorite Castlevania, but it might not be the case this time around. But is it still good? Is it still an enjoyable Castlevania game for everybody? Well, let's find out together. This is Castlevania Aria of Sorrow.
Castlevania Aria of Sorrow is the third Castlevania game for the Game Boy Advance. It's part of a series of Metroidvania-styled games that follows a new hero in the ongoing battle between Count Dracula and the Belmont clan. The story takes place many years after the events of the original Castlevania games on NES and Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Around 36 years prior to the game's events, the Belmonts defeated Dracula and locked away his power within an eclipse. But like usual, things never truly end in the battle against evil. Dracula's castle somehow appears over Japan and begins causing all types of havoc. A young man named Soma Cruz finds himself and his girlfriend dragged into the mix, coming across mysterious and somewhat familiar faces as he begins to unravel some horrifying revelations. Aiding him is the next in line to the Belmont clan, Julius Belmont, and a shady figure named Genya Arikado, who is much more than what he leads on to be. There's a lot that happens in Aria of Sorrow, though somewhat disconnected from the other entries of the series. The game continues the tradition of being a new and interesting entry into the Castlevania series. If you liked what you got in Symphony of the Night, then you're really going to dig what you're getting here.
Back in the day when I first played this game on the Game Boy Advance, I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty cool to have a Symphony of the Night style of game on the go for a portable console. But over the years, personally for me, my stance on it has changed. I feel like the story involving Dracula's castle appearing over Japan is a little bit wacky, even for a series as fantastical as Castlevania. Even with that being said, there is still enough story to chew on with all the different stuff that happens and all the characters that get involved with the story involving Dracula's castle this time around. In addition to that, there are some characters that do make an appearance that are very familiar to longtime fans, and some of the stuff that you could see coming from a mile away are exactly as you expect them to happen. However, some of the new characters, including the main hero, Soma Cruz, I think is pretty cool. He has a little bit kind of like, different stuff involving him and Dracula's power. That's very interesting and expands upon the lore, but it still feels a little bit more out of the way for the Castlevania series. I also should mention that this game does also have multiple endings, very similar to Symphony of the Night and some of the other games that follow that same style of gameplay. Depending on what you do towards the ending of the game, you could get one of a couple different endings, or you could actually continue the game to get an even better ending, much like in the same vein as Symphony of the Night. Let's be real, however, you're not going to get the same amount of content or the same type of wow factor that you got in Symphony of the Night. You got to explore a whole nother version of Dracula's castle in there. In Aria of Sorrow, it's not really like that. You get a little bit more extra gameplay, some extra boss fights, and including a much better final boss fight compared to the normal ending that you could get, and that is pretty damn cool, especially in the Game Boy Advance, but again, it's nowhere near on the same level as Castlevania Symphony of the Night. I would have loved to see a whole nother version of the castle that you get to explore and get to check out all this different stuff. That would have been really freaking cool, but again, you can only put so much on a Game Boy Advance cartridge, and I can understand the limitations of the technology back then. So can you still enjoy the story of Aria of Sorrow, even though it's not as great as Symphony of the Night or any of the other Castlevania games? Personally, for me, I still enjoyed it, even though, again, it's really out of whack, it's really out of the way for the series. I still think it's manageable for a game that's on a portable console. Anyway, let's talk about the gameplay of Aria of Sorrow, which is very similar to Symphony of the Night, but it has a couple neat little things that make it different than some of its predecessors.
Much like its predecessor Symphony of the Night, Aria of Sorrow has you exploring Dracula's castle and fighting enemies along the way. The controls are solid and fit well on the Game Boy Advance. Granted, there aren't as many buttons to work with compared to other controllers. You gain levels for Soma as you defeat enemies while exploring the castle, but unlike Alucard from Symphony of the Night, Soma has his own set of unique abilities. Using what's called the Tactical Soul system, Soma can equip the souls of defeated enemies and gain new types of attacks and powers to get around the castle. This ranges from gliding, double jumping, walking on water, and a slew of other powers and abilities. The more enemies you defeat, the more powers you could discover and use to your advantage. You'll just have to kill enemies over and over again in order to obtain them all. Many recurring baddies from throughout the Castlevania series show up here in some way, even if for a brief cameo, so there's plenty of fan service scattered throughout. The boss fights in Aria of Sorrow aren't as spectacular as what you might find in Symphony of the Night, but that doesn't mean they're not exciting or any more challenging to play. You'll need to gather all kinds of weapons and souls in order to take on many of these monsters that linger around the castle. Many of the big boss fights related to the story admittedly aren't as good as the others, especially when you have to fight a specific character in order to progress to the next area. Things get a little bit better for the bosses towards the end, but the build-up for them doesn't always pay off well. If you have the right souls equipped and spam certain attacks, you can breeze right through some of the boss fights no problem. Others might take you a few tries because you get hit multiple times within a short span of getting knocked back, draining a lot of your health and possibly killing you fast. But does any of this make the game any less fun to play? Not at all. It's still great to traverse Dracula's castle and fight enemies like in previous Castlevania games. Only now it's on the GBA. You get the same type of action you get in Symphony of the Night, but now it's on a portable console.
Now, my only problem with the soul system in Aria of Sorrow's gameplay is the fact that you have to equip certain souls in order to explore specific areas of the castle. This comes at a price because when you have to equip those souls, you won't have the ability to equip other souls that give you certain stat boosts and give you other abilities as you're exploring. A perfect example of this is when you get the Skeleton Soul, which allows you to explore the underwater sections of the castle, which is key to progressing the story. However, this comes at a price that you won't be able to equip the Headhunter Soul, which gives you some big stat bonuses for every soul that you gather up throughout the entirety of the game. I really love stuff like that, and I think that it's very important to have that on. However, I won't be able to do so if I have to go into this specific area. So for the entire time, I'm running around with a debuff, which really sucks, especially when I have to fight the boss that's down there. It's things like that that I find that are a little bit annoying. It could have been given like better design choices because you don't get stuff like that in Symphony of the Night. Certain abilities that are tied to exploration or allowing you to get past like certain obstacles and stuff are tied to more passive abilities where you don't have to equip them. They just go right onto your character and you can progress as normal. That's actually really damn cool. And that's what you have a lot of in Symphony of the Night, and Aria of Sorrow has a couple of those like that, but for stuff like underwater exploration, certain stuff with like flight and such, things like that you have to equip on the actual soul system. That might be a little bit of a nitpick for some people, but personally for me, I want to keep those stat bonuses. I want to keep making sure that my character is growing strong constantly, and I'm not really at like a disadvantage depending on where I go in the castle. I find that to be a little bit annoying. The other thing I do want to touch on again is the boss fights. I feel like some of them are kind of mediocre, some of them are very easy, and there's a big difficulty spike towards the later half of the game where you could actually die at some of these bosses. It didn't happen a lot with me, but it did happen a few times where I had to go back and grind a little bit in order to get more levels or gather other souls or even get better equipment from the shop or any other places that I hadn't yet explored. If you're able to maintain your pacing and actually explore the majority of the castle, gathering all these different items and stuff, you will be able to still steamroll right through most of the bosses, with the exception of some of the final bosses towards the end. And speaking of which, I actually want to talk a little bit about the castle in Aria of Sorrow, which is a little bit different yet similar to stuff from like Symphony of the Night or any of the other Castlevania games that are within this same gameplay style.
Aria of Sorrow has a bunch of areas to explore and backtrack through, but Dracula's castle doesn't have all of the areas that you might remember from other games this time. A few places are recognizable or similar to other games, but the majority of the areas that are in here are very different. My biggest criticism here is how you might have to backtrack a lot more through areas in order to figure out where exactly you need to go. A few times I found myself exploring deep into the castle, only then to spend a long time trying to revisit places looking for that one thing I missed in order to progress the story. Since there's no marker on your map to show what's the next key point of interest, you'll have to scan through the map yourself to figure out what to do next, which would get a little bit tedious. On the Game Boy Advance, this could be a nuisance on the small screen for some people, but if you're diligent enough, you could end up figuring things out.
I understand that this isn't a huge criticism or it really shouldn't be a big deal after playing so many of these games, but I do really feel like that the Castlevania games really needed a map that was actually more on par with the Metroid series, having a little bit more detail here and there. It's just on the Game Boy Advance, the screen is so small and the map could get so detailed, or at least as detailed as it could be, that trying to spot certain areas that you haven't really explored could be a little bit annoying, especially when you have to kind of squint at the screen in order to find that one spot that you just haven't been to. Things would have been a whole lot better if there was like certain little markers that you could put on the map yourself, or even just that the game gives to you in order to find certain key points of interest or areas that you're supposed to go to next. It would have been cool to tie that type of ability to certain souls that you could gather or certain relics that you could find throughout the castle. I feel like it just would have been a better quality of life thing that would have made the entire exploration and the backtracking a whole lot better. So with all that out the way, let's actually talk about probably one of my more favorite aspects of the entire Castlevania series, and that's the music. Man, that music is so goddamn good, yeah!
The music is something I always love getting into with the Castlevania series. Like I've said many times with some of the other games, the music here is pretty good, but if I'm being totally honest, there aren't as many standout tracks compared to the other games I've reviewed here on this channel. The music is good, but only a few tracks here speak to me as a fan. The first track you hear in the game is the best one. It's called Castle Corridor and plays throughout the entirety of the first area that you visit within Dracula's castle. This is the music that comes to mind when you start thinking about Aria of Sorrow. Have a listen real quick, and then you'll know exactly why I love the Castlevania music so damn much.
Okay, so not all the music in Aria of Sorrow is all that great. We at least got one good track. That's all I wanted, was just one really good track there. The other thing I do notice about the soundtrack of Aria of Sorrow is that there isn't a lot of remixes from past Castlevania games. One of the big things that you'll notice in games like Symphony of the Night, even Rondo of Blood, and I'll even argue Super Castlevania 4 and a few others, is that there's a lot of remixes of classic themes that you got in previous games. I always liked that about the series, and a lot of other fans really appreciated that. But in Aria of Sorrow, we get a little bit more original music, or at least I didn't notice any other iconic themes getting some sort of remix treatment. I could be wrong on this, let me know in the comment section down below, but I didn't hear anything that was recognizable. A lot of the music that you have is original, and it kind of stands for each one of the different areas that you visit within Dracula's castle, but for me personally, the first track that you hear, Castle Corridor, is the absolute best out of the entire game. Again, the music isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination, it's just not as good as some of the previous games in the series. It doesn't feel all that epic once you get towards the later half of the game, nor does it feel so iconic compared to other tracks that you got in games like Symphony of the Night, in games like Rondo of Blood, etc. So is Castlevania Aria of Sorrow really worth your time to play through? Even though my stance on the game has changed over the years, I still feel like it's rather enjoyable to play through on the Game Boy Advance, especially if you were a fan of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Koji Igarashi was also involved with this game. He's the guy really involved with Symphony of the Night, so a lot of the comparisons to that game are really justified for obvious reasons. If you were really craving a game like Symphony of the Night for a portable console, this was the best way to do so back in the day. The controls are really solid, it feels good to go through the entirety of the castle with a few little things that bugged me here and there, but overall as a package, Aria of Sorrow is still a great Castlevania game and one that fans will really get a kick out of playing through. Interestingly enough, the game actually was popular enough to get a sequel on the Nintendo DS, which is called Dawn of Sorrow. It's very similar to Aria of Sorrow in a lot of ways, the controls very similar, and you actually have the same type of abilities that you could get in this game. However, it does have a different story and a couple other functionality stuff with the Nintendo DS. Maybe one day if I'm lucky, I'll actually be able to tackle that game for you guys as well. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Castlevania Aria of Sorrow. I really enjoyed playing through the game and actually formulating my thoughts for this review. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching this video review as well. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below and tell me, what are your favorite Castlevania games? Do you like Aria of Sorrow? Is Soma Cruz your favorite character? Did you see some of the twists and stuff coming from a mile away? Put it in the comment section down below. Of course, don't forget to leave a like on this video and subscribe to my channel for more videos just like this one. I have a ton of game reviews and a whole bunch of other stuff I know you guys are gonna love. And don't forget guys, I am on Patreon. I have a Patreon page with a bunch of exclusive content that just for the $1 level or higher, you guys are gonna get a ton of content that I know you'll love. So definitely check it out when you can. There's links in the description box down below. Anyway, I will talk to all of you guys again very soon. Peace out and stay epic, everybody.